This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice.
Hey, Emerald, you know how One Nation candidates are scary, yeah?
Yeah, they're scary. Why?
Well, what about One Nation ghost candidates? Pauline Hanson's One Nation is running a network of ghost candidates who live far from the seats they are contesting and have done no campaigning whatsoever. At least a dozen One Nation candidates have no electoral presence or visible online footprint in the seats they are contesting. Some reside in a different state, such as Vanessa Atkinson, the candidate for the seat of Mallee in Victoria, who lives near Bundaberg in Queensland. Now that's pretty close, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not a geographer, but I think so.
Geographer. Diane Pepe, the party's candidate in the North Queensland city of Townsville, lives in suburban Melbourne in Paran. What the fuck are they doing?
Winning elections, Tom.
This is in the seat of Herbert where One Nation polls at 11%.
I know.
That's quite good.
Yeah. I knew about this one because a Guardian journalist who ended up reporting on this, I think, was like, so did you guys hear at the ballot draw them read out each candidate and where they were from? And when they read out the One Nation candidate, they said they were from Victoria. And our candidate in Herbert, Scott Humphreys, was like, yep, they said that. Yep. And we were all like, what the fuck?
Well, the Katter candidate was not happy at all when that name was read out. When they said Victoria, we all looked around at one another. Victoria is classed as Mexico in my books. They get all the gold-paved roads and the nice new trains, while up here in North Queensland, we fight for the crumbs. Okay,
this is very confusing. Is it because Mexico famously gets all the gold-paved roads?
Yes, it's geographically Mexico, but I suppose
yes, a border from you. Okay, yeah, I got it. I said I wasn't a geographer, but I get that.
The geographically Mexico, economically like the royal family. That's how you guys think of Victorians.
When I saw this quote, at first I was like, oh, that's so much better than the shitty quote that we gave the Guardian. No wonder they printed theirs and not ours. But now hearing it again.
That's Katter, colour and movement, baby.
I know. I wish they would teach us a thing or two. Maybe not about, the racism and transphobia, but apart from that.
Yeah. She was from Victoria, which is Mexico, but I ain't spending any more time on it. There is no public information or photos at all of Narelle Seymour, One Nation's candidate for the southern city seat of Hughes, who has been deleted from the party website. The electoral watchdog is reviewing Seymour's nomination, whose candidate eligibility form contained only a mistyped sentence that read, husband is an Australiana-born citizen. Now, I'm sorry, but if you're running for Pauline Hanson's One Nation, correct spelling of Australia. These are basics, people.
Australiana. That's a cute name. Cute baby names, maybe. I'll add it to my list.
Hey, my husband was an Australiana.
Lena. There's some cute nickname opportunities in there.
On Wednesday, an ABC reporter who made inquiries at a residence in the Wagga Wagga suburb listed on the Australian Electoral Commission nomination form was told by a man answering the front door that Miss Seymour was unwell. When asked if Miss Seymour was a One Nation candidate, the man told the reporter that he knew nothing about her being a political candidate.
No comment.
Hey, Narelle, are you running the election? The party had pledged to contest every seat in the House of Representatives, but only 90 candidates were lodged just before nominations closed. I think they're up to 149 or something, but a bunch of them will be disqualified inevitably. A voter in the New South Wales electorate of Greensland, Chris, said it seemed dishonest that his local One Nation candidate, Pauline Hanson, actually appeared to live in Queensland. Why are they running in Greensland?
Because they have, a strong grassroots base of support across the country. And, those people deserve representation in Parliament, Tom.
What's isn't there some rort where if you get 5, they need to get a basic level of vote in order to get public funding, or wasn't there just some?
But that's that's in each seat. But it's you would still just not run in the seats that you don't get over 6%. I think that's the threshold.
Right. The best one though is this guy who's going to run for Banks. Last week, Guardian Australia revealed that the candidate One Nation did eventually nominate to run in the seat of Banks claimed he had no idea he was running the New South Wales seat. Malcolm Heffernan, who has been referred to the Australian Federal Police for allegedly nominating in 2 separate seats on the other side of the country, claimed he did not know he was a candidate for One Nation. Heffernan told The Guardian he originally appeared to run for the party in Banks, despite thinking it was weird because he lives in Western Australia. He filled out a nomination form, but said he had later been told his services were no longer required. Believing One Nation no longer wanted him to run, he said he instead nominated for the little-known Australian Federation Party in WA. Last week, he was massively annoyed at being referred to the AFP for potential breaches of the Electoral Act. It's 100% not my fault.
It's a real, Romeo and Juliet story. He thought that they no longer wanted him, but all along they did. And now he is, committing electoral suicide by accidentally, breaking federal laws and running in 2 seats. There was some article on this that showed the kind of chain of emails where they're emailing him being and the subject line is Banks, and he's I thought I was running in Parramatta or something. And they're can you please just run where we don't already have a candidate? And he's no, what the fuck? I mean, it almost makes you feel sorry for some of these One Nation candidates. I know they're probably racists, but I have heard, not just in this election, multiple stories where, these people One Nation just fucking preys on them to fill their seats and bolster Pauline Hanson's career and maybe get the electoral funding. And they really are treated like shit because all they are is a name on the ticket. And a lot of the time they leave that experience. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe we just need to get every One Nation supporter to run as a candidate, have that experience up close with how shit and exploitative that party is, because they usually come out the other side being no, maybe they're not so good actually.
This is bad.
Yeah.
The irony too of One Nation candidates, not living in the place where they're supposed to be from, go back to where you came from, open borders on these elections. There is no law that says any candidate has to live in the election they want to run for, which I think is bullshit. No. I'm sorry. I don't know if that makes me a nationalist or whatever, or isn't that crazy though? Remember that we have Section 44. So if your sister's second cousin might have been from Vietnam at some point, you're ineligible to run under our constitution. I'm sorry, no good for you. But if you could run for a seat on the other side of the country and have no connection to the community, is that a good system?
No, yeah, you're right. It probably is. It's a bit silly. But it is funny, I think about, for example, when there's a redistribution, what if you're suddenly just popped out of your seat? Or what if you can't afford to live in your seat anymore, which I know has happened to some people, and they're looking for a fucking house in their own electorate. Right. And they're well, I simply can't afford this. So what do I do?
Well, those people should be richer and have more money. And that would make them better qualified to be our elected representatives.
I guess that's right. Actually, if we did have that law in place, maybe, it would weed out some of the pores for those important, richer electorates so we can get real representation.
Another problem solved.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
The Greens are nuttier than they have ever been.
They are snake oil salesmen.
Far more extreme than Clive Palmer or One Nation.
I'm suggesting they hate our society.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
A serious danger to Australia.
Welcome, friends, to the show. It's called Serious Danger. It's a podcast about green politics in Australia. It is not an official Greens Party podcast, not authorised by the Greens Party of Australia, but it is made possible with the help of the Green Institute. It is, of course, produced by the wonderful Michael Griffin. This week, can you believe it's 2 fucking weeks until the election? So we're checking in on how things are going, the chaos of a hung parliament if it happens, and some fun attacks on abortion rights in the US and what that might mean here in Australia. Actually, spoiler, it's not fun.
Unfun facts. I want to give it a shout out. People might have noticed in their feed, they might have got these bonus Meet the Candidates eps that we're doing. This is me having conversations with folks for Greens candidates in targeted seats, in winnable seats. We've released my conversation with Barbara Pocock, lead Greens Senator candidate in South Australia this week, and also Piers Mitchell, the Greens candidate in Kooyong, who is getting fucked over and completely ignored in the bullshit media focus on the fight between Dr. Meg Ryan and Josh Frydenberg, even though it was almost down to the Greens and the Liberals last time. He is a great candidate. It was a great conversation. We've got more of those to come. Please share them around and spread them far and wide, particularly if you're in the various geographical areas that those folks are from. And we're able to do that stuff and have our wonderful producer, Michael Griffin, spend some time on this because we're able to pay him because we have wonderful patrons. Big shout out to Graham C., big fat supporter on Patreon, $30 plus a month, can I say, if I can be crass.
Graham.
Talk about money.
Major donor?
Major Graham Wood? Question mark. Nick, Wiz, Dylan, Matthew, SP, Lysel, and Helen, thank you so much for being patrons. Go to patreon.com/SeriousDangerAU. Even just $3 a month really helps us out if you can afford it. And we got a wonderful message from one of our favourite patrons, Space Dragon Emerald.
Ooh, it's a dragon, but it's in space.
Thank you for singing the song. Hey cunts, just did some door knocking in Greenland with the Greens. Listening to the pod made me feel real relaxed about the prospect. It was my first time. I highly recommend any other pod listeners to get out and door knock whenever they can. Best conversation was with a police detective who was arrested on Labor voter who hadn't been visited by anyone else, and at the end of the conversation said we'd given him a lot to think about and was going to look into the Greens more.
Much to think about.
Thanks for making the pod. All right, well, don't recommend maybe Lydia Thorpe stuff to the cop or Maureen Faruqi. Just ignore all that stuff and focus on all the, the nice environmental stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Space Dragon. Thank you so much for door knocking. And please, I think I speak for both of us, Emerald, we would love to hear any more door knocking stories whatsoever. It fills our heart with joy and gladness. You can always get in touch with us. Email us hello@seriousdangerpod.com about anything. But if you are out there on the doors and having an amazing time or need to share what you're learning out there, we would love to hear that for sure.
Or even at pre-poll in the coming week. If you're at a booth hearing some fun stuff, some cute things happening, send us an email.
Cute things.
The Greens are licking their lips because they're preparing a list of things that they want in the possibility of a hung parliament. 75% emissions reduction target by 2030, an immediate ban on new coal, oil and gas projects. So this is going to put you in a very tough spot because if you've got a choice between being in power or not, you'll take the deal, right?
No, it's not, Ben. You need to stop talking them up. They've got one seat.
But if that's the only seat you need, you'll take it.
This is just a con for the Greens to talk themselves up. This is a complete distraction to make people think the Greens are more important than they are.
So just confirming, if you needed one additional seat to form government and that was held by the Greens, you won't negotiate?
Correct.
We are just 2 weeks out from Election Day. Holy shit. Time for another vibe check. We had a vibe check before the election started. Let's vibe check this shit again, Emerald. Thoughts on hashtag Ozvotes 2022? Question mark? Low
vibes. Low energy. I don't know. One more time with feeling, folks. Am I right? I'm bored. Are you?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm electrified and excited about the vision for the future that these Australian Greens are painting. That's all good. That's a thumbs up for that. But certainly the first couple of days, we probably spent our energy, it was like forgetting the unemployment rate and Google it, mate, and we're all going crazy.
Yeah.
And now it is just a long, slow trudge towards the end and a gradual realization that even if the Morrison government is turfed out, things could be bleak. We'll get to the results in a second. But yes, so you think the energy sort of sapped out. How about you personally? You're working on the Queensland Green State campaign. You're talking to the media. You're engaging with the Fourth Estate.
Which I love to do.
As they investigate and interrogate policies and compare them. That's not bringing you any joy?
My good friends. Thank you so much for everything. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I would say we had that little chat, I think at one point, maybe it was in that first week after it was called and we were talking about horse race journalism. And it's not like we don't engage with that. Like, sure, we will do the Greens can win stories because often that is one of the biggest barriers that people have for voting for us. But that's truly all we're fucking getting. Like, it really is just, apart from the regional papers wanting to know what's your stance on these 10 policies or these 10 issues, the national coverage is just like, okay, can you win this seat? Yes, you can. Maybe you can't. Maybe Labor can win it. Maybe you can win it. Maybe you can't. Maybe Labor can win it. It's just that over and over. It's so boring. Even the fact that like last week our episode was about housing, and housing is a massive issue. We should be talking about it, but it's the only real policy area that seems to have been seriously discussed by the media this week.
The Greens policy?
No, I mean in general.
Oh,
as
just
an issue.
generally, just generally housing. Okay.
Yeah,
and everyone's
don't
just
you
saying
think
it's
so?
fucked, and no one wants to talk about how to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, the number of articles that we've and even, for example, the ABC, I think, was running this little explainer. It was like a hack explainer, and it was like this quirky, so housing is fucked. How are we going to fix it? And then it was like,
Yeah.
here are all the party's policies. And then it was like, renting? Does anyone have a plan? Guess not. So, and it's like, hi, are you fucking kidding me? God.
We do. Talk about us.
It's like we're at the back. Being a Greens when they do these policy comparisons is like being the kid, i.e. me, at the back of the class, like when you're in primary school and the teacher's like, now does anyone know? And you're like, me, hand up, like, miss, miss. And they pick on some other cunt up the front. You're like, are you, I knew it.
And you just get bashed at recess. Yeah, that's the Greens experience.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then you spend a few years dealing with the trauma of that bullying, but that's
The climate thing's crazy too, because every time I read any coverage of climate policy, they will either list the Greens emission reduction policy and not list the science and draw the line between the two, or they'll list the science and then not list the Greens climate reduction policy. So and then it's just the two majors. So it's delightful stuff.
Yeah. One thing that does give me hope is the fact, I mean, okay, I know I don't want to spend too much time on this, I know, but what do you think about the fact that the Greens are now being included in a lot of the news outlets, like ABC even, are doing, when they do their comparisons between the major parties, they include the Greens as a major party? Because I'm like, that's pretty cool, right? But is it damaging for our brand?
As like they're listing it as a major party, or they're just including that into the
No, they'll go the major parties, Labor, Liberal and Greens.
I don't think it could be interpreted as damaging to our brand. Anybody talking about the Greens and our policies in any format, anywhere, all the time is good. I would strongly suggest that would be my vibe.
Yeah. I guess I just don't want to be lumped in with them because, I mean, that is obviously one of the key objectives of Palmer and Hanson and stuff this time round. They've tried to run it's Labor and the Liberals and the Greens. They're all the majors, the old parties. They're out of touch. They're the political class. Like, we can't then be an insurgent party that's going to challenge the status quo if we are lumped in with them. So
right,
it's a catch-22.
Okay. Well, and obviously we will see how this strategy pays off. But obviously we are running on a balance of power strategy, and we are saying pretty clearly, get us into this parliament, with what we think is a realistic goal in terms of the amount of political power that we can wield in the next parliament. So that's probably not, too radical in insurgents. Hopefully we're radical in our policies and our vision and how drastically we say things need to change. But yeah, I guess once you're saying, put us in a balance of power, put us into this institution of parliament, I guess there's a level of buying into the system, man, that comes inherently with that strategy, I suppose.
And yet somehow the independents will never be labelled majors or like lumped in with the rest of them. But anyway, moving on.
Let's see how it's going. So recent polling, obviously polling, a big grain of salt, which doesn't actually matter. Just keep fucking door knocking, just keep running out there and talking to everybody and spreading the word. But it's important to check in on this. The polls at which we say that we're doing well are really good, and like we should pay attention to them and take them seriously, and anything else is trash. Newspoll had the Greens at 11% and 53 to 47 to Labor in the two-party preferred. A Resolve strategic poll from last weekend had Labor on a primary vote of 34%, Coalition 33%. FYI, Labor had a primary vote of 33% in 2019. So some would argue on this poll that not exactly like got it in the fucking bag. Gillard got 38% primary vote in 2010 and still had to form a minority government. So just those are some interesting comparisons. But the Reserve poll also had the Greens at 15% nationally, 12% in New South Wales, 15% in Victoria, and 18% in motherfucking Queensland. Or as it shall now be known, Greensland, baby.
I know. I think I said once before, it's like, I know I shouldn't look at polls, but it's like when we have one like that, it's like I can look at it for a little treat. I can have a little buzz, maybe a little poll for Emerald.
I can has poll.
I have to move back. Yeah, I can. Fuck.
Interesting. Look, a focus on Queensland from The Guardian as well. This article talking about the Greens are confident of winning at least one more lower house seat in this month's federal election, with the party increasingly buoyed by data showing its vote is increasing in Queensland. So that 18% poll in the Resolve strategic poll got a lot of people excited. and they sort of laid out the strategy. Before the election, the Greens nominated 5 seats as its main targets. The coalition held seats of Ryan and Brisbane in Queensland, as well as Labor's seat of Griffin, held by our friend Terry Butler. Plus, Labor held Macnamara in Victoria and Richmond in New South Wales. Listeners to this pod are very familiar with our wonderful candidates there. While the Greens are still running hard in all 5, the 3 Queensland seats are emerging as the party's biggest hopes of winning a second House of Representatives. Even as I say this, I feel like I'm just jinxing everything, but this is the article that we're reading. But multiple Labor sources said they were very confident of holding Griffith, Richmond and Macnamara. Additionally, the opposition is putting considerable resources of its own into Brisbane and Ryan, with Labor increasingly viewing those coalition seats as among the few genuinely winnable seats in a Sunshine State. Now, should we care about this? Is that at all accurate? Does it even matter? I would assume that Labor sources talking to The Guardian are going to beef up their chances, right? They're not going to say, we're fucked. The Greens are totally going to kill us in these seats. That's not going to happen, right?
No, of course. Yeah, they're not going to acknowledge that the Greens are a genuine threat in those seats. It does seem like if we can take anything from both of these things, it's that it does indicate there is a swing away from the LNP on, like that some Liberal seats will, we hope, fall. I guess what I've been thinking about is, like the ramifications if they do fall to Labor in seats where the Greens are advancing, a bold and quite radical and progressive platform. Yeah, how insufferable the fucking Labor Party will be if that happens. But the implications that it will have for Australian politics in future, because is that an endorsement of this fucking centrist platform that Labor is running? I have no doubt they'll take it as one, and we could be quite royally fucked.
Yes. I mean, the implications for the country or whatever, but the important thing is, are we going to get owned? Like, who will be owned?
The important thing is, how fucking annoying will it be to log into twitter.com? The answer is so fucking annoying.
All right, let's talk about how this thing could roll out. Let's prepare ourselves. Let's do the emotional labor to prepare ourselves for various outcomes. All right. 4 possible outcomes as far as I can see. 1, Greens majority government. It could happen.
Most likely. We're going from most likely to least likely.
Most likely to least likely. Greens majority, Adam Prime Minister, you and me ministry?
Yeah. We have been promised that as a deal for doing this podcast.
Very cool.
And it's that tweet about, Greens being horny and free sex and fuck you, boss.
Coalition majority. Coalition to back in. Boo.
Boo, hiss.
Labor majority. Yucky.
Boo, hiss.
Dan Nolan on Twitter was saying, like, the perhaps funniest outcome or the most banter-filled outcome would be a Labor majority, but also a bunch of teal independents elected who can just do nothing, who have no impact on politics whatsoever.
Lol.
And I just remember back the days when no one gave a shit about independents in any way, and they were just like there in the background.
God. Take me back to the.
But there's also this option of a hung parliament. Much talk about that. Very quickly, I'm sure most people are across this. Emerald, what do we mean when we talk about a hung parliament?
Parliament with lots of big dicks.
Moving on.
When no party has enough seats to hold a majority government. So what, there are 151. How many do you need? 76. Is that right?
Yep.
So if you have less than 76 seats, basically, it's a hung parliament, baby.
Hung. And the government is certainly turning up the fear rhetoric on this. A vote for the independents is a vote for chaos, instability. We provide stability. If you vote for the independents in a hung parliament, there'll be chaos. It'll be bad for Australia's security and stability, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that actually works? Do you think people buy that shit at all with the very recent memory of the Gillard minority government? Like, is that how people associate it, or do you think that stuff cuts through?
I thought, like, if you'd asked me a little, maybe a year or so ago, I thought that this was something that people associated with hung parliament, but I have not heard a single voter say something like that when talking about balance of power or hung parliament. And someone was actually saying to me, and I was like, oh, that's a good point. If there is one good thing to come out of the teal independence thing, Climate 200 stuff, it is voter education, because the media is finally willing to engage in that and talking about what balance of power actually means and hung parliament actually means. And there's, I think, so many more people this time round will be aware of the fact that a hung parliament and balance of power situation is possible, and B, that it could actually result in a more efficient and a more, a government that has more positive outcomes for them in their lives.
Right. Minority governments, of course, happen all the time in Europe. They happen in the state and territory level quite regularly. And, of course, federally from 2010 to 2013, the Gillard government was in minority and the hung parliament and formed this minority government, the Gillard minority government. And, of course, Guardian did explain. I looked at the proportion of government legislation passed by each parliament over the recent history, or all Australian history, I think the whole thing went back to, and pointed out that the Gillard minority government passed 91.8% of bills, including stuff setting up the NDIS, the NBN, the Murray-Darling legislation, carbon pricing, getting dental into Medicare for kids, thanks to the Greens, Renewable Energy Finance Corporation, Gonski reforms, etc. The Morrison government in the last parliament passed 83.6% of government bills. And I do think what's working against that attack line is like the past 3 years haven't exactly felt less than
Stable.
chaotic.
Yeah. So true. A stronger future.
It's been a fucking shit show. Exactly. I think what does work against that minority government period is, I certainly remember it as a very chaotic time. You had Tony Abbott going on the attack every single day, freaking. You had the fallout of the global financial crisis and the debt and deficit disaster stuff. So that felt very chaotic. And of course, you had Kevin Rudd backgrounding and trying to return to the prime ministership against Julia Gillard. Now that has nothing to do with the minority government. Maybe it played into the atmosphere or just how vicious the right Tories went because there was sort of knife edge stuff. You had the Peter Slipper affair as well. It did feel like a somewhat chaotic time of politics, but that's not necessarily because there was a hung parliament and those coalition deals were made, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm not too sure that a lot of non-hacks would associate the chaos of federal politics and politicians specifically with that era. I think that a lot of people will agree that politics is, like a circus and it's fucking chaotic and it just it's ridiculous and barely worth following anymore. But they would kind of identify that starting after Howard, really. Right. And whatever, Labor or Liberal or minority government, whatever it was since then, that has been the pattern. I don't think there is a huge proportion of the population who specifically associate that with the Gillard minority government.
Right. Okay, so in a hung parliament, both sides would have to deal with the crossbench. The current crossbench of the parliament we just finished up is 1 Greens, Adam Bant, shout-outs, Bob Katter, Rebecca Sharkey, Andrew Wilkie, Helen Haynes, Zali Steggall, Craig Kelly, technically became an independent for briefly, then joined the United Australia Party, and George Christensen, days before the election was called, left the LNP and I guess joined the crossbench. Yeah. So Craig Kelly is almost certainly not going to get re-elected in Hughes for the United Australia Party. That's my hot prediction. Pretty bold of me, I know. George Christensen is running in the Senate now, so they're gone. And all those other candidates, those independents that I listed, would be pretty safe of being re-elected. They're going to be returned to that crossbench. So then the question is really how many more MPs are added to that crossbench, and are they going to be Green or are they going to be Teal? And in that situation, we get a hung parliament and if Teals were dominating the crossbench or had a really significant say, I don't know. Do you actually see these folks actually supporting a coalition minority government? And I'm talking about people like Allegra Spender and Zoe Daniel and Dr. Monique Ryan in Kooyong and Goldstein and Wentworth. And the only reason that I understand these are former like dissatisfied Liberals or very centrist people, but they are running just such a massive campaign against Morrison and Frydenberg and inspired to run by the toxicity of the current coalition government. I just don't see how it would be a great look for them to say, yep, we'll return Scott Morrison as Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think that they would. There was that article a little while back that posited that maybe they, like one of the conditions they could ask for is that Scott Morrison is no longer leader. I think that would be a fucking waste of negotiating power, but who knows? But no, I think that they want to position themselves as the people who will negotiate with the Liberals to improve them. I think like a lot of their voters and them, they're like, the Liberals are good in principle, but they've lost their way. Yeah, it's almost similar to, like the way that the major parties work in the States, because they actually do have very much a two-party system. They don't have preferential voting, et cetera. But yeah, like the way that the factions in the Democrats, for example, they do like campaign against kind of their own party to improve it. I feel like that is the dynamic between the Teal Independents and the Liberals.
God, Jesus Christ. Do you see that guy, Fred Chaney, who was like a Liberal minister in the Fraser government, wrote an article about how he won't be voting Liberal anymore. The party that I joined and love has lost its way, and I support an independent candidate. Turns out that candidate is his fucking niece. It's just, and like, he made points that I suppose would resonate with Liberal audience, and I suppose the fact that he's a Fraser minister had some weight, but I'm like, you're just endorsing your niece. I can't take this seriously.
Yeah.
All right, another possibility, and let's really get nutty with it here.
Let's not. What are we
Let's
doing?
read this article from Mark Sawyer. The Coal Coalition, what if the majors cut their own deal? Stranger things have happened.
Yes.
This is Mark Sawyer at Michael West Media. Now, I like Michael West generally a lot, and they do fantastic reporting, and I like him as a journalist and the stuff they post on their site. This article, and I'm interested to see what you think, it did strike me as overreach.
Oh.
Labor and the coalition look like reaching historically low joint levels of support at the election. The assumption is that this will result in a hung parliament. But there is another scenario, a super long shot, which belongs at the very outer edges of the possible. The election has so many variables. Majority government for Labor and less likely coalition, hung parliament with Teals in charge, hung parliament with the Greens in charge. Yay. Or something completely kooky, a grand coalition. In other words, Labor and the coalition cutting a deal to deliver stable government for the life of the parliament. A rotating prime ministership, an agreement to dissolve the partnership for the next election and fight as separate parties again. Crazy, yes. Bloody unlikely, yes. But impossible, no.
You know what would be so random and kooky?
Let's get nutty with it and go random. Look at this paragraph. Impossible once was war in Europe in 2022, or a virus flattening everything in its sight and closing down society, and now our society becoming inured to the continuing casualty tallies. There's a long list of impossibles. Trump, Brexit, same-sex marriage, defeat for the Republic referendum, Scott Morrison winning in 2019. Now, hang on.
No, okay. I don't,
Other crazy things happening does not mean that your crazy thing is going to happen. I'm sorry.
But also, like, all of those things I would say were things that people were like, it would be crazy if this happened, but the reason that we're discussing it is because it's possible. Whereas this is the thing that no one's really even talking about.
Also,
but to be honest,
Trump,
like,
Brexit, same-sex marriage? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, it's
same-sex marriage was nothing if inevitable.
Inevitable,
it was clearly we were heading towards that position.
These are all just things that are like, maybe it would happen, maybe it won't. That's it's interesting. I like this article though. I think it's fun.
It's fun to imagine.
I mean, it's not. I also, I don't think it's as crazy though as you might.
Okay, well, let's just
not
flesh it out a little bit more.
Sorry. Okay, keep going.
Okay,
all right.
We'll flesh it out a little bit more, and then we'll come to whether or not this crazy shit is going to happen. Whether this is the same-sex marriage of electoral outcomes. Fossil lobby's dream option. Energy policy is the only issue which might bring the majors together. But that's crazy, by the way.
Nope.
There are lots of other things.
Most of the policy platform, actually, but go off. Okay.
And it's been reported at Michael West Media, Labor is closer to the coalition on energy policy and the matter of new fossil fuel projects than it is to the Greens and the climate independents. That is true. Yeah. To the chagrin of the Greens and independents, there are 114 new coal and gas projects in the pipeline in Australia, although both climate progressives and international energy authorities want a ban on new fossil fuel projects. Fossil fuel corporations are huge donors to the coalition Labor, correct? Their lobbyists are pervasive, they're big donors as well. Even in recent days of the campaign, Labor quietly edged closer to the coalition on emission reduction exemptions. This was to woo voters in coal seats, but the corporate money is where the real pressure lies. Coal, oil, and gas prices have shot through the roof in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this is all perfectly, logical analysis of the fact that the fossil fuel industry has captured these parties, and they are very much on a unity ticket when it comes to continuing to cook the planet. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agree. Next.
So Greens and Labor, a rocky relationship. Let's assume Labor gets the first throw. What?
Sorry, you said Greens. You said Greens funny. Go on.
Greens. Let's assume Labor gets the first throw in a hung parliament. The first thing Anthony Albanese might do is tell the Greens there are no deals to be done, and that he's repeating that regularly on the campaign trail. No deals, deals with the Greens. The Greens would hardly flee into the arms of the Liberal and National parties. Hell-bent on banishing the coalition government, the Greens don't have much of a negotiating fallback. Apart from stopping the government from opening new coal and gas mines, their wish list includes dental care on Medicare and the waiving of student debt, and the beautiful dream of big corporations and billionaires paying their fair share of tax. No problem, Labor might say to the non-climate stuff, but the ALP is still feeling burnt by the minority government of 2010 to 2013, which it believes gave too much power to the Greens. It might just present the Greens with a take-it-or-leave-it deal. As one Labor backroom operator foreshadowed a possible Labor taunt to the Greens if they hold out against Labor, go back to your branches and tell them that you're supporting Scott Morrison and Barnaby Joyce. Now, this is just a point that I've stuck on once or twice and I'm a little bit confused by, and I would be interested in your thoughts on this. It does feel like by saying that we want to kick out the Liberals, that we will never side with the Liberals, that we will form a Labor government, and by Adam saying that we do not want to send people back to the polls, don't we kind of rob ourselves of our negotiating leverage in any way? And why would Labor make a deal with us to move forward if we've already ruled out the alternatives that could potentially give us leverage in that situation?
Well, I think it's about Labor being strategic and the ramifications for them politically if they send the public back to the polls. Like that's what they will have to be weighing up, because we will be in a position where we're like, we want to work with the government. We want to negotiate with them. We're we're coming to the table. We've brought all of these things to the table. And that's the position we've had for, months and months now.
Yeah.
And Labor really look like fucking dicks if they just go, no, we will not. And we're going to do the whole election again. If we aren't allowed to have every single thing that we want, yeah, they're fucking obstructionists. And like, imagine how irate the Australian public would be if Labor sent them back to the polls because they failed to put dental into Medicare, for example, like because they refused to do that. Like they're like, no, we will not give you free fucking dental care. Instead, we're going to make you go vote again. They're going to be like, cool, I guess we won't vote for you, like for a long time.
And they have far more to lose than the Greens would necessarily.
Exactly. That's right. They have a lot more to lose. And and the Greens, I think, our messaging has been consistent all the way through. We've got all of these things that we're putting on the table. We want to work with Labor. It's really, it's up to them,
And I think I've heard some Labor folks say, well, they would, yes, as that quote suggested, their strategy in that scenario is to put the impetus back onto the Greens, saying we're going back to an election because the Greens will refuse to form government with us. And we don't think that's going to carry much water, right? Because everyone could know, we can lay it out there. There's been no negotiation. You're not prepared to give anything whatsoever. Therefore, you are the children.
Greens members aren't that fucking stupid. And we have had, because we're an actually democratic and grassroots party, we've had this whole process where we've surveyed the membership on what they would like to see us do in a balance of power agreement. And there's been a lot of discussion with the membership about what that negotiating process would look like. And they know how it works. They know that really it will be about, is Labor willing to work with us on this? And so they're like Labor is already bleeding votes to the Greens. I think that really all this would do is they would lose those votes forever and probably a lot more to us.
And of course they can go back to their fucking Coke and Pepsi position of just like, well, yeah, if you don't like exactly what we've laid out in our election campaign, then your only alternative is the Conservatives. And you go, no. We have another alternative, which is you be less shit and you meet us halfway on some of these policies that we've been campaigned on and that we got elected for, right? Like we have an obligation to people who elected us as MPs, obviously, because we paid out this vision of what Australia should look like. And if you're not going to give us anything to that, then you crazy, bro.
Yeah. You look like fucking dickheads and brats, honestly.
Back to the article. Save the coal and gas, which brings us to the weirdest thing Australia might see in an already weird decade, the unholy alliance. But an unholy alliance presented as a salvation to the nation. Imagine Morrison and Albanese going to the Governor-General with a plan for an orderly transition to clean energy that keeps the lights on. It would certainly please their fossil fuel donors. They would pledge to contest the 2025 election as separate entities again. A ministry would be constituted with clear boundaries. The coalition, say, would get Treasury and Defence, Labor, Health and Housing, Daddy and Mummy. It would be quite amicable. Emissions policy would converge at something between a 35% and a 43% cut, and the existing fossil fuel export base, plus those 114 coal and gas projects, well, they would be safe. Then he goes on to say that, yes, it's crazy, it's a long shot. Maybe this reads like science fiction, But don't underestimate the desire of the big parties to keep the Coles-Pepsi duopoly and the big money behind them. Even Margaret Thatcher expressed belief after dealing out one election thrashing to Labor that her foes had survived as the official opposition instead of a third force.
Yeah.
So what, you think this could really happen one day?
I don't think it's that crazy. Like, I don't think this election, obviously, but maybe not that far in the future. I just, this article, like, it acknowledges that their policies are converging to the point that they will probably at one point be almost identical. And they do seem far more interested in keeping out minor parties like the Greens. Because at the end of the day, they have the same interests. Like, they both represent capital.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, but isn't the illusion of the disagreements and the fights and the conflict, the manufactured conflict, and yes, the desire to try and provide a clear choice, I feel like that's fundamental to their survival. A huge part of the Labor animating base is obviously to get the fucking Tories out. And likewise, the Tories want to bay back the left. If you can't campaign on that, if you seriously want to say we're all on the same team, even though we've been telling each other that they're fucking crazy for years and years and years around the entire history of our existence as parties, I feel like that would just piss off their base way too much.
No, but maybe it's like what I was just saying about the relationship between the Teal independents and the Liberal Party being that kind of, it's like a confected or a manufactured opposition that's really based more around tiny issues or kind of like personalities and just whatever the fuck's in the news. And they absolutely could still, be like, well, we are separate entities and we're going to call them out when they do this and we're going to have a go at them. And they will. Occasionally they'll, call them out and they'll be like, see, we're not afraid to stand up to them. And they'll, as they say, contest as separate parties at the election. But they'll also do that thing where they're like, but, we will work together to secure a strong and stable government.
Sensible
it's
solutions.
It's very possible.
We're going to meet together in the centre. And after all, we're all Australians. There's no red or blue.
So true. Exactly. Yeah. I'm starting, I'm like, maybe the independents and the way that they are effectively just like a proxy party for the Liberals that's designed to act like they're standing up to them without really doing that in any way so as to limit or threaten their actual power. That is an indication of where politics is heading.
It'd be great for us. It'd be great attack. I mean, it'd be terrible for us. Politically, I suppose. But it'd be great, the attacks that you could run, like vote for Anthony Albanese and you'll get Scott Morrison. Like literally, a vote for Labor is a vote for the Liberals.
Yeah.
It would be honest, as you say, that they agree on so much already.
People would just be like, well, but he's going to, when he's in Parliament. They'll hold them to account and sometimes they'll call them out in the media when they do something a little naughty, but they're working together.
Look, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, okay? Think of all the good that the Labor Liberal National Coalition could achieve.
Yeah, that's right. Lol.
Hey, they're the real party for the working class. This coalition, they're the real left-wing party.
So true, yeah. Well, you can't look after workers without looking after business. And that's the embodiment of that meme that says, bitch, are you far left? Are you far left or far right? Bitch, I'm farting.
It's good shit.
Do you know how many volcanoes there are under the water? Anyone want to have a guess? A million. That are releasing all this carbon dioxide out of this and they're warming the oceans, but we're being told, no, it's human emissions. Every time you breathe out, 4% carbon dioxide. Did you know that? So, are they wanting to get rid of the humans? Is that what it is?
Speaking of dystopian futures, this week a draft ruling by the US Supreme Court was leaked to the media and everyone rightfully freaked out because the majority opinion indicated that the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade, it's actually Roe v. Wade, or is it?
Roe v. Wade.
Ruling would be overturned. So that would end basically a 50-year guarantee of federal protection of abortion rights in the country. So the ruling suggests that 5 justices are in favour of overturning Roe. And that is, as I understand it, because of the Trump appointments, which mean that the Supreme Court in the US has this 6-seat right-wing majority. And you'd put this in here, Tom, that all 3 appointees had said they respected Roe v. Wade as the law of the land during their confirmation hearings. So are they now they're like, oh, we just kidding?
Just kidding. Funny little joke we told. I guess, of course, no one should have believed it in the first place. And even though they're judges, so they're just sober and they're in the middle, they just weigh issues up and look at the law and make those decisions. They're, of course, deeply politicized political ideologies enacted through their rulings. And a bunch of them, even though that it had on their records previous rulings on abortion cases, which indicated their personal beliefs and their ideological worldviews, when they're getting confirmed, say, yep, no, Roe versus Wade, that's the law of the land, that's settled law, we respect precedents, and then bingo, bango, just kidding, lol.
JK. I'm not 100% across how Roe v. Wade works in the States, but my understanding is it kind of, protects against state-based legislation that would, criminalize abortion. And so in a bunch of states in the US, abortion rights have been wound back in recent years. There are authorities using, phone tracking technology to prosecute both doctors and people who receive abortions. Mm-hmm. So we won't get the actual decision from the Supreme Court until the end of June. Yep. But if it goes ahead, it would mean that each US state could now decide whether to restrict abortion. And the 22 states where they already have bans in place, those would come into force. And
there's all these trigger bans as well. So basically legislation that's on the books that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, immediately those abortion laws will come into effect in a bunch of states as well.
Yeah, and we know that obviously this will disproportionately impact the most marginalized groups in the states, women of color, working class people and First Nations people. And as most, pro-choice folks say, and the fucking evidence says, it will not prevent abortions from happening. It will not reduce the rate of abortions. It will simply drive them underground. It will make them more traumatic and less safe. So we all know you don't fucking stop abortions by making them illegal. You just make them less safe.
You sure do.
You sure do. So there's some this video that you posted in here about the leak being the real crime in this situation. Can you explain this to me? I tried to watch this video and I do not understand what is happening. Maybe we can put a quick excerpt in.
Oh, people absolutely have to listen to it. They need to watch the footage themselves, and they need to know that this has not been sped up in any way. But this is Don Trump Jr. expressing his rage at the idea that someone would leak a judgment before it was released officially from the Supreme Court. And across the American right wing, this is the greatest crime in the world. This is devastating to our democracy. This is evidence of the radical left. The radical left clerks at the Supreme Court have clearly leaked this ruling early out into the world, and Don Jr. is not happy and
losing his mind.
He might have gone skiing before he recorded this particular rant, but enjoy.
You saw the leak from the Supreme Court, an unprecedented thing. This kind of stuff doesn't happen. I don't know that I'm ever aware of a leak. This is not like Congress where everything leaks. And trust me, I've done enough testimony. Things are leaking during closed-door hearings. I get it. The Supreme Court doesn't have leaks. So if there's not a thorough criminal investigation into who leaked privileged documents about a draft decision from the United States Supreme Court, where a small, tiny handful of people have access to it, then we live in a clown show state. We live in a clown show state, folks. For perspective, the FBI sent, I believe it was 15 people to investigate a garage pull. Remember that the NASCAR Bubba Wallace thing? And thought it was a noose. Well, it's a garage pull. Basically on every garage of every NASCAR track that anyone's ever been at. Didn't matter. 15 people. And if they don't send people to investigate this, then again, we live in a clown show state.
So this is, and I think there was a little bit of commentary around this that we won't go into, but that this is some sort of strategic move that will benefit the Democrats for some race coming out because they can, use it to campaign. which is just so fucking deeply cynical and horrible when, like, maybe we should talk about the actual impacts on fucking people who, you know, will potentially have their lives ruined by this. We don't even know exactly how that will play out yet, but it's got a few people talking in Australia about whether something like that could happen here. And it absolutely could. Like here, we only just, I think, was SA maybe the final state or Queensland to decriminalise abortion. I know Queensland decriminalised in 2018. And so we've only just got legal abortion in all of the states and territories in the country, and there are still some restrictions, you know. But thankfully, yeah, we have reproductive rights that are treated under health and not criminal laws now. Abortion in Australia it's common. It's an essential health service. About 88,000 people have an abortion in Australia each year. And between a quarter and a third of women living in Australia will have an abortion in their lifetime. And the Australian public, like quite generally, is strongly pro-choice and has been for decades. And yet there has been that movement to enshrine it as a legal right. But it's still not necessarily widely accessible. It's still not always safe. It's still not affordable in a lot of cases. And the fact is that at any moment, like probably an LNP government or a Liberal government could overturn it.
They could certainly, yes, change those various laws, and it is on a state-by-state basis. I suppose, yeah, it is not a issue that is resolved through the courts in the same way that it is in the States.
No.
And look, I have some sympathy for the general argument that it's not great that these 9 people have this extraordinary power to both either grant or undermine women's rights to have control over their own fucking body. And the idea that, I mean, I think it's good that justices in the 70s read into the American Constitution in any way they could to try and identify this basic right that would make society better and would recognize women and people's ability to have say and control over their own bodies. But yes, we don't have the same kind of constitutional issues or judicial system that results in a bunch of judges being able to overturn this stuff or strike down certain laws. So if the right wing wanted to change this shit, they would do it through legislation, either at the state level, or you can restrict access through, for example, taking certain healthcare branches off Medicare, right? Or just impose a financial burden on women who want abortions. As we said, sometimes some of the most vulnerable people in our society say, no, this will actually cost you even more money than it already does, discouraging people from accessing vital healthcare that they need and deserve. Yeah,
because this is the thing right now. I think a lot of people don't realize how inaccessible abortions are, even though they are legal, for particularly people living outside of the cities. So in Queensland, for example, which is the background that, you know, I kind of know best, and Dale Kelleher, who's a friend of mine, and she's the CEO of Children by Choice, who do fantastic work on reproductive rights and helping people to access abortions. And she was tweeting about this recently, about the fact that just because abortion is legal in Australia doesn't mean that it's accessible or safe or affordable for everyone. And one of the biggest problems is public access. So actually, a lot of public hospitals won't provide abortion services, particularly outside of the cities.
Right, with the exception of South Australia and the Northern Territory, and some, I think there are specific things for vulnerable people, low-income folks in Victoria and Tasmanians. Most public hospitals don't generally offer abortion care, so it's almost entirely done through private clinics. Which blows my fucking mind.
It is wild, hey, like that, and that's the kind of thing I think. Even I do a lot of the time. I forget. I'm like, well, you know, it's abortion. Like it's 2022. This is something I don't spend a lot of time being afraid that this right will be taken away from me. Yeah. But it's actually not even that great, and it absolutely could be. And you know, for example, last year when Marie Stopes, who's a reproductive health private clinics, and they provide abortions as well as other reproductive health services, and they closed their regional clinics in New South Wales and Queensland, which has massive ramifications for people living in the regions in those states. But the fact is that, it was just they couldn't sustain it anymore. They were literally chartering private flights to fly doctors out to places outside of Brisbane or outside of Sydney to get them to provide abortion services. And even, Children by Choice talk about clients that they support who are turned away multiple times. This was one of the things that Dale was tweeting recently. So she said, at Children by Choice, we recently supported a person who was denied access to abortion several times, presented at emergency department 3 times with attempts to self-abort and suicidality, and was turned away in Queensland in 2022. And Dale said this person's now been supported to access the abortion that she wanted, and she wanted to share her story. But a lot of the time they're having to provide, any support they can, train, even if it's just like a train ticket so that they can get down to Brisbane to get the fucking healthcare that they need. And these are sometimes it's, it might be women who've been raped. It might be teenagers who don't want their parents to know. And they then have to somehow get that healthcare while traveling fucking, hundreds of kilometers away without their parents knowing and potentially facing the ramifications of that. It's just, it's quite fucked. There's now only, so since Murray Stopes closed those clinics, there's now only one private clinic that provides abortions outside of Brisbane in Queensland.
Fucking hell. GPs will often charge between $200 and $300 just for that, just for the service, like in order to get in and get your appointment seen. There are these abortion deserts, as we mentioned. There's a map here that we can put in the show notes maybe that just shows like just the huge swaths of the country in which there's either no or very few or perhaps one abortion clinic where you can access those services. And it's just I was reading an article about it. It's all about the over-regulation of abortion. Like it's not treated like the healthcare that it is. It's this special case which, over-regulates that particular procedure compared to other healthcare procedures and also further stigmatizes it. And so it's stuff like in WA, New South Wales and South Australia, doctors are still required to provide patients with information about counselling services, whether those patients want or not. So if you walk in, you're like, I definitely want an abortion. I've thought about this. This is my decision. These medical professionals are still legally required to say, hey, look at this pamphlet about how you're going to hell. Not that. But you know what I mean? Like clearly a state mandated counselling to override the needs of certain patients when that could absolutely not be what they need at all in that particular moment.
Yeah. And again, like I think that as a feminist, a lot of the time I'm like, we're doing all right, like we're doing pretty well. We've come a long way.
You're doing so well, aren't you?
We are doing very well,
us
women's. Thanks, Tom. It's remarkable how overregulated, industries and healthcare that primarily affect women are in comparison to things that primarily affect men. So, for example, you look at, it's similar to sex work, primarily women's work, so fucking overregulated and criminalized in some situations when other work isn't. Isn't that just so fascinating?
It's so fascinating.
It's just so interesting to me. And I remember even I was thinking about this, and from an unreasonably young age, before I'd ever had sex, probably I guess since I, first got my period, I remember.
Have you had sex?
No, not yet, but so
what's it
one
like?
day maybe, hopefully, if anyone wants, get in touch.
That's a patron tier that
that's
can access.
But I remember kind of thinking, do I have the money in my little fucking child piggy bank bank account for an abortion if I need one? Like,
Jesus.
That is quite fucked. And I'm sure most young girls think the same thing. Like, they're like, if I happen to get pregnant, will I be able to afford an abortion? And that like intense fear, which is just, it's fucked that we even have to deal with that.
Yeah.
There's a, if anyone's interested as well, actually the first Class War song that we released is about abortion and reproductive rights. It's called You'll Burn. Yeah. But I wrote those lyrics during the 2018 when the debate around abortion laws in Queensland was coming up, because I was working in Michael Berkman's office, in a state Greens MP's office, and just the intensity of the lobbying and the kind of materials that electorate office staff were having to deal with and look through on a daily basis when that was happening. It was just horrific. And it is an indication that organisations, far-right anti-abortion organisations like Cherish Life, who are still operating today and who have fucking Liberal MPs, Liberal senators like Amanda Stoker speaking at their rallies, they would send, Michael at the time was expecting a baby with his wife. And they would send graphic videos of, of surgical abortions and be like, watch this, and graphic photos. They would come into our office and abuse his staff, mostly women, young women, to the point where they would be crying. Like, it's still a fucking insidious force in Australian politics to control women's bodies. Just goes to show in the States, a lot of the time Australia will follow the States in terms of politics, where we're already, we caught up on QAnon, and then we're catching up on, the fucking trans folks, culture wars. And if that's any indication, this will come here. So fun times ahead.
Well, Liberal backbencher in the great state of Victoria, Bernie Finn, is certainly hoping that is the case. In response to the leaked Roe v. Wade decision, outspoken Victorian Liberal MP Bernie Finn posted, "So excited the US is on the verge of a major breakthrough to civilization. Praying it will come here soon. Killing babies is criminal." Above a meme showing a baby's face and the text, "Civilized societies don't kill their young." He also said he doesn't support abortion, even in the case of rape or sexual assault, writing babies should not be killed for the crime of his or her parent, which makes no sense.
Wait, the crime?
The crime, hell. Like, does he know what a sexual assault is? Yeah. Like, just truly batshit crazy. As you said, like last weekend, there was a Cherish Life rally. Amanda Stoker, Assistant Minister for Women, was there. She says no, complication or contradiction in wanting to mandate control over women's lives and being the Assistant Minister for Women. Now, again, the only reassurance one takes from this stuff is how marginalised those kind of voices are and where the public seems to be in terms of reproductive rights, and that's fantastic. But I suppose also just the US example, and perhaps just very recent history, just shows that things don't automatically get better and progress isn't assured. And this liberal fantasy that everything just gets better and we all get more progressive and tolerant, we just move on, is just bullshit. Class war continually fought on all sorts of different levels in all sorts of different ways. And the ruling class often wins a lot, and it can actually send back progress backwards, which only makes the fight, even more urgent and important,
Because they'll just adapt their messaging and their strategies, and in the same way that they have adapted or, co-opted feminist rhetoric to campaign against trans women's right to fucking exist.
Yes.
They already are co-opting feminist rhetoric to campaign against abortion, and they'll say that it's about women's rights because abortions have a negative impact on women. Or one of the ones that they would also run was that more girls will be aborted than boys because parents don't want baby girls, and that it's about the rights of girls and women. It's horrific stuff, and there's no evidence obviously to support it, but this is what they will use. And there's one resource as well, if you ever are having to have these conversations with people and talking about the impact of safe and legal abortion versus when women are turned away from abortion. There's this longitudinal study in the US that's been going for many years, I think even decades, called the Turnaway Study. And we can put a link in the show notes, but that talks about the impacts on women who are turned away from an abortion. And of course, there are massive health impacts, economic impacts, it's huge. And so when people try to tell you that abortions are harming women's health, you can show them that, because turning people away from legal fucking healthcare is what's harming people's health.
That's such a great point. We are protecting women and girls when it comes to women's sport, but if there's women and girls get raped, we think they should carry their body, their baby to full term, and don't have control over their body and make their own decisions. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
The Greens policy, FYI, just quickly, abortion should be legal, affordable and accessible. Accessible to affordable sexual and reproductive healthcare, including abortion and contraception, is part of every woman's right to control her own body. Rural and low-income women can face long distances and high costs. We must expand access via the public hospital system. Larissa Waters regularly speaking out about this, as is Marine Faruqi. And if nothing else, just take comfort in the fact that these kind of policies make the worst people around very angry. Cherish Life Queensland, ahead of the 2020 state election, when it was a real issue, right? Because the LNP was saying they were going to review the decriminalisation. One Nation was saying they're going to completely ban it or wind it back entirely or some bullshit.
I don't know, but LNP, we had a very anti-choice LNP candidate in Maywa, in Michael's seat, and we had graphic materials sponsored by Cherish Life with photos of a fetus next to Michael's face being sent out to everyone's letterboxes. So, oh yes.
That's what they are too. They're anti-choice. They're not pro-life. They're anti-choice.
Yeah.
But this is from their website. It would be fair to say the emergence of the Greens is a major reason why the Labor over the last 30 years has drifted into a dangerous, socially engineered, anti-life, even hell-bent place. There would be one thing worse for life than the current Labor government, and that is a Labor-Greens coalition government. Things would get very dark for life if Greens held the balance of power.
Dark for life.
Dark for life.
That's my motto. I do think it's interesting. Because I was looking at this week, and I don't know why the Greens policy is not to make abortions free, rather than just when we say affordable.
Yes.
I'm like, look, they really should be free.
Right. I mean, yes, free, absolutely. I mean, even when we say, free dental into Medicare, or at least in the kids' example, that's $1,000 worth of dental over, over a 2-year period or something like that. Or there is a limit. These are still limits. So free at the point of service for a bunch of services is always embedded in there. Now that the quote is from the 2018 platform. I couldn't find anything sort of more pressing, and it's certainly not a major issue in this particular election, of course. But that's a good point. Yes, it should be totally free, like all healthcare, for fuck's sake.
Thank you.
And we will get it with a Greens majority government, which is definitely going to be the outcome of this election.
Yay.
You know you can't do this. You know you never tried this. Saying it's easy means nothing coming from you. You want to ruin someone's life, hold it over their head. Is that unfortunate placement rapist? I would rather be dead.
Okay. Can you believe, though, pre-poll fucking starts tomorrow? People start voting from tomorrow. What? It's already too late to change some people's minds. Or is it?
Or is it?
Or is it? If you haven't rostered yourself onto a pre-poll booth, I would say do that now. We know that having people on the booths can increase the Greens vote by up to 2%. There's some stat, I think it's around 20, like a quarter of people aren't making up their minds until maybe the final week of the election, and it's like 12%-ish make up their mind literally when they get to the fucking booth. So if you are there to tell them, if you vote Greens, you will potentially get dental into Medicare, they might go, okay, thanks, I will. So, make sure you're in a pre-poll booth. The other thing you can do, the Greens this week launched their How to Vote website and their website that's specifically dedicated to preferences and how they work. And we did, we had a chat about this on the episode, but a lot of the time people are looking for the resources to talk to people about how preferences work, why you're not wasting your vote, voting for a minor party, for example. And I think it even has information on there, or at least will link to how the Greens can make their policies a reality if they are elected and end up in a balance of power position. So it's greens.org.au/preferences. We'll put that in the show notes, as well as the vote.greens.org.au website, which has all of our how to votes. And Tom also has a little project, doesn't he? Tell me, boy.
Little video I worked on with my friends. I posted about this week. People might have seen. We're asking people to stage what we're calling a boomervention. You can go to boomervention.com.au and might give you a bunch of resources to help you in this. But the idea is that, of course, we'll have boomers in our lives and we love them all. They're dear to us. But sometimes they vote incorrectly. And we really want to change that.
They're so funny and silly, aren't they?
They're silly. They're cute. They think that everything can carry on as it is and nothing can change. No, that's not true. And hashtag not all boomers. I posted this video on Facebook, and of course that unleashed the fucking tidal wave of boomers saying, actually, I've been voting for the environment since the 1970s.
Oh, it's called the Franklin Dam blockade.
Anyway, the idea is that, of course, you might be a progressive young person, but the boomer or either your parents or your grandparents might just be rusted on in their ways voting for the major parties, and they're not going to listen to me necessarily.
As they shouldn't. No one should listen to you.
No one should listen to me, but they might listen to you because you're related to them and you are their flesh and blood. And so the idea is to have a conversation with them, explain to them why it's important for you that they vote with the climate in mind, and influence their vote, and sort of have that conversation with them. You buy them lunch or coffee or what have you, sit down. I know it's awkward and weird, but you could actually have a really meaningful conversation. This campaign is sort of inspired by the Great Schlep, which helped elect Obama back in 2008, which a whole bunch of folks, primarily Jewish people in New York, talking to their elderly relatives in Florida. and sort of having this conversation as to why it's important to you that they folks vote progressively and vote for a climate-focused independent, but really Greens, vote Greens is the general idea. So you can go to boomervention.com.au. There's some fun resources there to help you out, and you can watch a little video featuring my fat little face. And think about it. You've only got a limited time before Election Day, so stage your boomervention today.
Boomervention, folks. That's right. And if you have some thoughts on, that word boomervention, or whether you like Tom's little ideas or not, maybe pop them in a review of the show, or not. Maybe only put the nice things about this show in your reviews. You can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now, and it really does help us kind of, it helps get the podcast up in the charts, helps people know about it and get more people listening. You can also support the show on Patreon or follow us on @SeriousDangerAtYou on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And for all the info, obviously just head to seriousdangerpod.com. Until next time when it will be less than a fucking week until the election. Whoa! Bye, friends. Go pre-poll.
Yay.
Serious danger to Australia.